Welcome to Embedded Finance Review Podcast and the first episode of 2025. My name is Lars Marco. Embedded finance describes the merger of the non-financial with the financial world. Typically, we are seeing non-financial companies such as Uber, Starbucks, or Shopify integrate financial services and offer them to their users. With the combination of these two worlds, the best companies aim to achieve customer value of 1 + 1 = 3. This means the user has a better experience using an embedded finance product instead of two separate solutions. We often assume that only non-financial brands can integrate financial services. But can also banks integrate non-financial offerings and thus also create embedded finance products? In this podcast, I'm speaking with Hessel Kuik, who is a co-founder of Bizcuit. Bizcuit enables banks to offer accounting and invoicing features, and thus they can compete directly with standalone bookkeeping tools that offer banking products. Let's dive in. Hi, Hessel. Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today, and in what part of the world are you located right now?
Hi, Lars. Thanks for having me. My name is Hessel, and I'm in Utrecht in the Netherlands.
It's great to have you on the show. In the intro message, already spoke a little bit about what you and your team at Bizcuit are doing. Obviously, you enable banks in a way to enter the offering, or like enable them to offer embedded finance products. Maybe to kick things off, can you just explain a little bit like what Bizcuit exactly does and how you approach the market?
Yeah, sure. So with Bizcuit, we have a clear purpose, and the purpose is to make the lives of entrepreneurs easier. And we still see that many entrepreneurs struggle with their daily finances. Many entrepreneurs are still spending their Sunday afternoons on typing over invoice details into internet banking, etc. And we want to automate that for them, and we want to do that in the banking app. So what we do with Bizcuit is sell embedded services to banks. So we enable all banks to become SME banks and have these features inside the bank app.
Great. Yeah, from my perspective, I guess it makes a lot of sense. In the embedded finance language, it's like, obviously for, let's say, a freelancer or small, medium business size companies, all these things like bookkeeping, banking, invoicing, they're like so tightly together, and probably unlike any other thing in embedded finance, it already historically has been a very close topic to the things that are happening in the bank account. But obviously, there's a lot of benefits of doing it directly in the same app. I guess it's just, in this case, the more uncommon way to see it directly in a traditional banking app. So quite keen to understand, like, how did you end up thinking about this product and selling it directly to banks?
I actually have three companies. Bizcuit is one of them. Another company is Minox. It's an accounting software solution. And we are already around for 40 years. And we see how entrepreneurs, they don't want to do their bookkeeping. They want to leave it to bookkeepers. But they do have to play their part in bookkeeping. So they have to provide invoices and receipts to their accountant. They have to share the bank transactions with their accountant. And our vision is that the entrepreneur does that in the bank app. Every entrepreneur already has a bank account, has a bank app. So it's the ideal place to do these kind of things. And today in the market, we don't see a lot of banking apps do this, especially not in the Netherlands. There are some apps in other countries where we see it. Basically, as a small business, you are treated as a consumer by your bank. So you have your bank account, you have a bank card, but there's not a lot extra. And there's a lot to be improved there. So we stepped into that space.
And like you mentioned it sounded like basically you started with a direct offering, a direct like bookkeeping, invoicing offering, or the other company that you referred to is a tool where basically, let's say, a freelancer or maybe a small, medium-sized business can basically get these services directly. And then with Bizcuit, you are more or less doing the same features, the same technology, but in a way, the freelancer or the SME is not coming to you directly, but consumes these services through their, let's say, traditional bank account. Is that correct? Or?
More or less. With Bizcuit, we do not offer bookkeeping functionality, but we offer integrations with bookkeeping solutions. Of course, with our own solution, but also all the other accounting solutions in the market. And we say that the accounting solutions are for accountants. Entrepreneurs, they have other things in finance that they do. And those things, that should be in the bank app. So sending an invoice, for example, that's something the entrepreneur does. And that would be great if you have that in your bank app. And also paying, for example, invoices that you received. As mentioned in the beginning, many entrepreneurs are doing that manually still. But it would be great if the invoices that you have it in your bookkeeping system, that you can see the accounts payable in your bank app and just pay those bills without any manual data entry.
Okay, and as you said, it's like, let's take this theoretical journey of somebody like their new bank or the bank they've been using for a couple of decades now signs up with Bizcuit and makes these features available. From what I understood, it's not like I have to change my existing bookkeeping and invoicing setup. I perhaps use already a provider, but instead of navigating always to that provider to see certain things, I can now see these things directly in my bank app, and there's no need to have a new completely set up with a new bookkeeping software.
That's correct. Yeah. So what the customer journey would look like is you have your bank app, you already have it, but the bank app would have new features. For example, receiving receipts and invoices in your bank app. So you can simply make a picture with your phone from a receipt. We can digitalize the information, extract the data from the receipt, and send the receipt immediately into the accounting system or to your accountant. And we do the same with invoices, but with invoices, there is something extra that you need to do, namely pay the invoice. So in your bank app, you can receive the invoice by making a picture or uploading it, and then you can pay it. And both the invoice document as well as the payment information goes to your bookkeeping system automatically via the integrations that we offer.
Okay, that means basically that the person in charge of the bank account and the bookkeeping would basically still use both platforms, like the bank app, obviously for banking activities, and the bookkeeping app maybe for other activities, but there's probably lesser of a switching in between these two platforms and making sure everything is clear on both ends, because there's the integration and you can perhaps even access certain information on the one side if you happen to be in that app anyway.
Yeah, so that's for entrepreneurs that do their own bookkeeping. They have a bookkeeping system and they work in it. They do their daily financials in the bank app, and then every once in a while, you can do some other tasks in the bookkeeping system. But what we see a lot in the Netherlands is that entrepreneurs work with an external bookkeeping firm. And often the entrepreneur doesn't even have access to the bookkeeping system or does not even know which bookkeeping system is used. So when connecting the bookkeeping system from the bank app, you can do it with your own credentials if you have that, or send a connection request to your bookkeeper, and then the bookkeeper receives an email and connects the accounting system, and then the whole setup is done.
Interesting. And if you go back in time a bit, like to the point where, I mean, as I mentioned, you have your direct bookkeeping and invoicing solution. And at one point, there was obviously the decision on your end to now also launch an offering directly at banks to, in a way, directly compete with your standalone offering. What was the main trigger for you doing so? What did you see in the market? What has convinced you that such an offering makes sense?
So I joined Minox in 2015, and the company was already around for about 35 years back then. But we didn't have integrations with banks. So that's the first thing I started to look for, is how can we integrate with banks? That was not as easy as I would have expected. And this was in around 2016. So I started looking for alternatives, and that was when PSD2 came on my radar. It was not legislation back then. It was effective as of 2019, but there were already draft texts. And I saw a lot of opportunity in PSD2 because it helped us solve the issue of connecting the banks, not only in the Netherlands, but in the whole of Europe, and not only for getting bank transactions, but also for initiating payments. And then I made the decision to build those bank integrations in a separate company. And that was the start of Bizcuit. So the users of our Minox accounting system, they connect the bank via the Bizcuit app, but the Bizcuit app is also available to users of many other accounting and ERP systems. So basically we were a hub enabling software solutions to connect all banks in one go. And then over time, we saw that some accounting systems, they didn't want their users to have yet another app, because they already had their own app from that particular accounting system. So that drove us to the area of embedded services. So they appreciated the services that we were offering, but they wanted to have those services or features in their own app. So then we switched, or added, actually next to the app, we added the embedded services targeting accounting systems. And then we got also interest from the bank side saying, hey, if the accounting systems can connect all banks, why would it not be possible from the bank side to connect all accounting systems? So there's a bit of competition between banks and accounting systems around who will be the primary channel to serve the SME customer.
And that's obviously a question I want to dive into a little bit deeper as well. But maybe before doing that, from my perspective, funding quotation mark, my journey also started with open banking and a way ended coming then to embedded finance. As you describe it, it sounds like that basically also PSD2 specifically, but of course the whole trend around open banking basically opened up this opportunity for you, and probably without PSD2 or open banking, you wouldn't have had the chance to speak to so many banks, or there wouldn't have been the need to do that. But obviously, thanks to the regulation, there was a lot more touching points between your company and banks. And that's basically also where probably with a new hub that you launched with Bizcuit understood what the market need is and how this can be also addressed on the bank side. Is that correct? Or?
That's correct. Yeah, we were already working with the banks in 2018 before PSD2 was actually there, because the banks had to test their integrations with market parties. And there were basically no market parties back then that could do that. So we were working closely with the banks. And from that, we had many conversations over the last couple of years about how to best serve SME customers. And a lot has changed in the banking landscape since then. As you obviously know, there are many banking as a service providers. And what you see happening in the market is that, for example, accounting systems, they start offering their own bank accounts, and they're not actually their own bank accounts. They work with banking as a service providers, but you can open a bank account from within your accounting system. So that's a threat to the traditional banks that see SME and entrepreneurs basically open bank accounts with competitors, but more digital competitors, the BaaS players. And there are also more neobanks that also offer SME-specific features in their bank apps. So, the question is, in the next couple of years, where do SME customers go for banking? Do they go to a neobank? Do they go to their accounting system where you can also open a bank account? Or will they stick with their current bank, the traditional banks that have the biggest adoption currently? Yeah, I think the traditional banks have the best opportunity because they already have these customers, but they do need to change because they need their functionality to be on par with those other players.
Yeah, I was keen to understand, like from your perspective, you mentioned now a couple of players who basically, obviously we talk about these customers, potentially like freelancers / SMEs, and obviously there might be some different needs and requirements among them as well. They might not all be same, but like very high level speaking from your perspective, you mentioned now the bookkeeping providers who embed bank accounts as banking as a service providers. You mentioned neobanks who are obviously much faster in maybe new product development, and then traditional banks. What do you think is the benefit or the benefit for each of these providers? I mean, you mentioned already that the banks have a really good position, but is it just because they have already the customer, or do you see also other benefits that they can leverage in such an offering?
Of course, they also have the brand name, and I would expect most entrepreneurs to look for the more well-known bank brands when they start a business to open a bank account there. And that gives those banks an ideal position to also serve that customer better and more services to that customer. So I think if a bank would offer accounting functionality, for example, would be very logical in the customer journey. You open a bank account, you onboard with the bank, you onboard with accounting services, invoicing services, for example, and you go from there.
Yeah. Again, what we said before, right? I mean, especially the part of invoicing, accounting, bookkeeping, everything around it is so close to what's happening in the bank account anyway. Yes, you can make probably in the embedded finance world that comment for a lot of other things as well. But I think everybody would agree, like nothing is so close to banking activities such as bookkeeping. So obviously having that in one place makes a lot of.
And every entrepreneur needs both a bank and a bank account and needs to do the bookkeeping. So it makes a lot of sense to combine the two.
Yeah. I was actually just remembering a couple of months ago here at the German FinTech conference, I was also moderating a panel. I'm not going to say the names now, but they were also let's say the two sides there, like a neobank and a bookkeeping provider, both going for the same end result. So to say, both of them know very well what their product offering has to look at the end of it, and that's completely baked in. And now the question is, who has a better point or who has a better chance to pick up the customers, right? In the one hand, you mentioned already that some of the customers have already an existing bank relationship. And obviously, we all know it's always a massive challenge to change your bank account. So much easier to just consume the bookkeeping and invoicing services from the existing bank account. On the other hand, if it's perhaps a person or a company who is just getting started and just the question is then like, what do they think first about, right? Do they first go to the invoicing provider? Do they first go to the bank? What preference they have? I think you kind of said it as well. This is not a question we can fully answer today. I think there's a lot of companies out there have potential to play a really good game in that.
I agree. And maybe it's not that black and white who wins the full market. And maybe it's more about how is the entrepreneur using the services? So maybe you're using the services from within your bank app, but the accounting services are still provided by an accounting software provider, but not in a separate accounting software solution. It can be embedded. And I think that's where we're heading to. That's the future and not the very distant future.
Of course. I totally agree with that. I guess there's still one element where probably all of these providers want to be the first line customer front end and not be like put too much in the background. I mean, neither the bank nor the accounting provider. But if you still want to have the case or the business, even if you're in the background, rather than nothing at all, right? I'm quite keen to ask as well, like, since you are probably, I'm guessing, like more in the Netherlands, but still you're dealing with a lot of banks. And you mentioned already like the change of landscape that we obviously see. I'm quite keen to understand, do you see also banks that directly understanding it? So do you speak to banks who really understood, in quotation mark, that potentially a standalone accounting provider with embedding a bank account is really a competition? I mean, I'm sure they know that this offering exists, but do they see it as a competition? Because very often when I see bankers or talk to bankers, they very often claim that those services might not be competing with them directly because they serve a different customer group and it's not relevant for them. And obviously that is to be discussed. But how do you think like bankers at the moment, especially in the Netherlands, see these, let's say, direct, indirect competition?
Yeah, I think that's changing very rapidly. I think indeed a year ago, the bankers would say, oh, it's so small, it's not a threat. But it's growing quite rapidly. And although the numbers are still relatively small, the growth curve is picking up. So you need to recognize that it's happening and you need to act on it. It's a discussion. I see it in the banks at the higher levels of management right now.
That brings me back to, I think, like many years ago, maybe even like 10 years ago, being at the very first like fintech conferences, at least that I attended back in the days, where we always had this very often this diagram of the sharks and the different fishes in the pond and like who is really your competitors, right? And I think banks specifically are known to an environment where they compete directly with other fishes or whatever, who are exactly the same limitations, the same challenges, the same mindset, so to say. And obviously now competing with somebody who has a complete different mindset is a bit of a change in mindset, because obviously those companies might be able to do certain things that you are not able to for whatever reason. And obviously all of this will impact the market directly or indirectly.
Yeah, I fully agree. It used to be all the same, right? Banks were banks, but now you have neobanks and banking as a service providers, very different models. Each chooses different strategies, and by partnering, things go even faster. And so one banking as a service provider can power 1,000 niche solutions, vertical solutions, and the banks will see competitors that have a much better product market fit because they're addressing a very specific niche. It's a lot easier to start a bank. And I'm putting in quotation marks because you're not actually starting a bank because you're using a banking as a service provider or you don't have your own license, but you can build a full proposition quite fast these days.
Yeah, I fully agree. So we spoke a little bit we spoke quite a bit about the offering that you provide with Bizcuit. Quite keen to understand, like in what stage are you at the moment? Like, do you have already like bank partners? Is this product already available? What are your plans ahead as well?
Yeah, so earlier this year, we've launched with the first banking partner in the Netherlands. That's the Volksbank. They're known under their brands SNS, ASN, and Regiobank. Soon all to be merged into ASN Bank. They announced that earlier this week. And the customers of those banks, they can, from within their bank app, connect their bookkeeping system and automatically deliver bank transactions into their bookkeeping system. And this connection, this Rails, has more possibilities. So we're looking into how we can expand that. So that's the first partner that we've launched with. We have also started a partnership with Mastercard. We've actually won a big competition from Mastercard called Mastercard Strive, which is about making the lives of small business owners easier. And our solution was a very good fit. There were about 500 tech companies throughout the whole of Europe participating, and we were one of the 10 winners, and we got funding also from Mastercard. And that helps us accelerate the delivery of these services and also international expansion. So we're planning to move into Germany and Belgium in 2025. And at the moment, we're in conversations with many, both traditional banks and neobanks, and actually also banking as a service providers to enrich their offerings with accounting integrations mostly.
And when you say expanding to other countries and also maybe talking to other potential type of targets, the offering you expect to be like more or less the same, that you combine, aggregate on the one hand, all the different like existing accounting, invoicing, maybe not all of them, but maybe at least the relevant one for your target group, aggregate them and then make them available via an API. So then on the other hand, a bank, or of course, from your perspective, hopefully multiple banks, a lot of banks integrate these APIs to make features from these different accounting providers available.
Yeah, so most of these conversations are indeed about integrating those features into banking apps. But also we have conversations about simplifying the process to get a loan using data from the accounting system in the process. It's a lot easier to simply connect your accounting system than to have the hassle with all the paperwork that is normal today. So it can be a lot easier, a lot faster, and it actually is better data, more recent data, more granular data. So for loans, that's an important one. We have also partnered with payment services providers, very similar to what banks do with delivering bank transactions into accounting systems. You also want your PSP transactions to be delivered into your accounting system. So that's a use case. And very closely related is credit card data. So issuers that have credit card data can use our platform to automatically deliver that data into accounting systems. And the last use case we actually have live now with one customer is about collections, where a collections agency gets the accounts receivable data from the accounting system via our platform. And based on that, automates the whole collection process. So automatically sends out reminders for payments, for overdue payments.
Understood. And when you now like paint these pictures, and obviously this is like also a work in progress in some areas, so we'll see how some of the things exactly look like. But in a way, and I think you used this word at the beginning as well, you're kind of building this box, this connector for banks basically to, in a way, do embedded finance product, integrate these kind of things. But obviously you're not like reinventing the wheel there. You're just like looking what kind of like data features could a bank use. Perhaps in your arguments, and I would fully agree with that, is each bank shouldn't be integrating all these sources directly by themselves. This is probably also not very straightforward in all the cases either, and requires a lot of understanding in some of these areas. So obviously having like this like a single point of like integration where you get access to all the relevant data for your customer enables then the banks to build like the necessary financial products on top of it.
Yeah, so it's a lot of heavy lifting, and we do that heavy lifting for the banks. And it's not only building the integrations, it's also maintaining them. Things are changing all the time. And next to that, it requires a lot of domain knowledge about how accounting data is structured, and each accounting system does it a little bit differently. Also, we see that there are pretty significant differences between countries. So I had a conversation earlier today with a bank that has something like this in the UK, but it works very differently there. So that we also bring local expertise for Europe.
Of course. And you did mention one thing, and I think this is like the part of financing, potential like loan application in that the whole solution. I think this can also be like revert back to what we said earlier. Obviously, when you partner with a banking as a service provider, I mean, not all the time, but very often it's purely focused on cards and accounts, and there's no kind of like financing product in there as well. So in a way, you can also argue that obviously specifically for companies, maybe not the, let's say, small freelancer, but more like the SMEs who also requires financing and different loan products, they might be actually, for that reason, even happier using a bank with the integrated accounting feature, because obviously they can perhaps, or they want to use financing products from that directly, where alternatively working with an accounting provider who just has a bank as a service integration can't satisfy this need, or perhaps needs other partners, other integrations for lending to fill that need, which is of course also possible. But of course, if that's something that's very early in the decision-making matrix relevant for the company, might maybe perhaps for some of them tend to work with a bank directly.
Yeah, I think a good example is maybe our partnership with Rabobank. They have a product called invoice financing. So basically you get a loan against a sales invoice for which you still have to receive the money. So maybe your customer pays you in 30 days from now, but you want the cash today, you can get a loan against that invoice. And we have launched that together with Rabobank in our own app, the Bizcuit app. So you can connect your accounting system. You see all the accounts receivable, so all the invoices that are still open. And with each invoice, you can see what the loan is, the amount of money you can get against that invoice. And then with a few clicks, you can get that loan and you have the money up to 100,000 euros within 24 hours on your bank account.
And that wouldn't be necessary that I'm like my Rabobank is my first primary bank account.
Correct. No, you can be a customer of any other bank. And this is a feature in the Bizcuit app, but this could be a feature in the bank app as well. If you have that accounts receivable data from the bookkeeping system, including the underlying document, the actual invoice document, then you can build such a solution on top.
And I guess also, like from your perspective, like targeting banks, selling to banks, having Bizcuit as a standalone offering, not just like integrated into a bank partnership, probably helps you a lot as well to show banks what's possible. You right now described the Rabobank feature, and that's obviously something when you're talking to banks or on pitches for banks for certain like tenders and partnerships, where you can show what you have built already and what the usage is, right? Whereas if you were selling directly pure integration products to banks and don't have an existing partnership yet, that might be a little bit more hypothetical and perhaps harder to understand.
Yeah, certainly. And we've learned so much over the last few years with having these services available via our own app, that we have optimized our solutions already, and we know exactly how to provide them to banks.
And coming back to your setup you spoke about two different companies, one that has the direct to, let's say, SME freelancer offering, and then Bizcuit targeting banks. Do you see any challenges having these like two companies? I mean, we see not directly in your space, but perhaps in other fintech areas, specifically at like neobanks who start an infrastructure unit and spin that out and offer infrastructure products besides their neobanking product. Do you see that perhaps as a lucky challenge, so to say, in the future, that you have both of them and you probably should rather focus on one, or do you see both of them like growing side by side?
I see them growing side by side, but there are also quite a few synergies that they are very much complementary. And with Bizcuit, we have done the same as what you mentioned. We have spun out our technical services as embedded services, and we're doing the same thing with our accounting solution. So we now have accounting software, but we're making that open as well, so we can provide embedded accounting services. So I would see accounting to become functionality also, for example, in your bank app. And we are close to having the technology to have fully embedded accounting in any third-party application. And that can be a bank app. We already have a few partnerships with niche ERP solutions, so ERPs for specific industries. And they build what they are good at, the industry-specific things. But the accounting, they can use our technology for it. We call that the Minox Inside proposition, and it's like having a chip inside your software that does all the accounting. And I think we'll see much more of that, where systems are fully integrated and it doesn't really matter anymore in which channel you are working. It's a mesh of different services provided by different providers that you are then using.
I guess we have seen that in fintech, but also in adjacent industries or maybe in tech in general, that obviously entry barriers have been reduced quite a bit over the last decade or so for various reasons. And obviously now we do not have to think anymore in like certain kind of silos. Now it's all about what is our customer or user want to achieve and what's the best way to get there, right? And we kind of portrayed already like what the different angles are. At the end of it, you have to get a job to be done, basically. And the question is like, which provider is best set up? And in a way, yeah, of course, there might be today already, maybe it's still a preference for a brand X or Y, but at the end of it, all of these things can change quite quickly as well if there's one provider who can get the job done better for the customer than somebody else.
Yeah, I think probably a good example is WeChat in China. It's an app that started with chat, obviously, but it now does everything. And it's a compilation of many services provided by many providers. I think that's something we can expect in Europe as well.
Great. Now, when we publish this podcast, we're recording it like right before Christmas, but probably publishing it like in early 2025. What is your goals for the year? Like, where do you, when we record another podcast a year later at the end of 2025, where do you hope to stand? What's your progress until then?
Well, we're planning to announce quite a few partnerships that will come already early 25. Yeah, and we want to have a dominant position in the Netherlands in the course of 2025 and already have a start in Germany and Belgium and hopefully have our first partners there as well.
Interesting. Thanks, Hessel. It was a really interesting chat. I learned a lot. I guess maybe we can do that in a year or so. Check in again and then see where you stand. Obviously, all the announcements you will make in the meantime, I'll make sure to cover them in the newsletter and share the embedded finance details of the announcement. If there's a listener out there who wants to get in touch with you, learn a little bit more about Bizcuit or speak to you directly, what's the best way to reach out to you?
LinkedIn is probably the easiest way.
So go out there, go on LinkedIn, find Hessel and chat with him directly. Hessel, thank you again. Until next time.
Thanks, Lars.
Thank you for listening. For more episodes and our weekly newsletter, please visit embeddedfinancereview.com. And please reach out if you have an interesting embedded finance story to tell. Until next time.